Tonight, some disturbing news from Georgia. The new front in the shameful nationwide attempt by the GOP to suppress the vote. The Secretary of State, a Republican, has been caught on tape warning about minority voters turning out at the polls.
In closing, I just wanted to tell you real quick, after we get through this runoff, the Democrats are working hard. There's been all these stories about them, registering all these minority voters that are out there and others that are sitting on the sidelines. And if they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
This is blatantly partisan. It's a blatantly partisan comment from the state's top election official. He then went on to urge Republicans to match those efforts.
We've got to do the exact same thing. I would encourage all of you, if you have an Android or Apple device, download that app and make it your goal just to register one new Republican voter.
This is the same person who's investigating Georgia's largest Democratic voter registration effort, accusing the group of committing voter fraud. There's a concerted effort on the right to make voting more difficult for certain folks in Georgia. State Republicans have already cut 24 early voting days from the calendar this year. And on Tuesday, Republican State Senator Fran Miller wrote an angry response to a new early voting station in DeKalb County. Quote, "Now we are to have Sunday voting at South DeKalb Mall just prior to the election. This location is dominated by African-American shoppers and is near several large African-American mega churches. We will try to eliminate this election law loophole in January." And when he was criticized for those comments, he doubled down, saying he would, quote, "prefer more educated voters than a greater increase in the number of voters." What is this lawmaker worried about? That early voting would be too convenient for African Americans? That they wouldn't be educated enough to vote? We can't sit by and let voting rights come under attack in Georgia, where Dr. Martin Luther King began his long fight for voting rights and equality, and not anywhere else in the U.S. where those rights are being attacked. Joining me now is Georgia Democratic State Senator Nan O'Rourke and Lee May, interim CEO for DeKalb County. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton.
Thank you.
Senator O'Rourke, let me ask you, what do you make of these new comments from Georgia's Secretary of State?
I'm not surprised because he's a Republican and a member of a party here in Georgia that's been blocking access to voting. We passed the second voter ID bill in the country was passed here in Georgia by the GOP. So there's been a steady drumbeat of the Republicans trying to suppress the vote in Georgia. They should be encouraging voter participation, and that's what democracy is all about. Instead, our highest official in charge of elections is caught on camera making these kinds of comments about minority voters, and then proceeds to actually attack a nonpartisan voter registration project that's going on here in the state.
Now, Mr. May, it was your push to expand early voting sites that prompted the GOP lawmaker to talk about African-American shoppers and more educated voters. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's unfortunate that Senator Millard took this position. We were simply attempting to increase accessibility to the polls. The trend in DeKalb County, Georgia, is that during presidential elections, voter participation is as high as 70%. But during off-year elections, it dwindles down as low as 40%. And so by adding one additional day on October the 26th, it gives us an additional day for people to get out and vote. And then on top of that, we also expanded the locations of where they can vote as well. Now, we put it at South DeKalb Mall, which is predominantly African-American area, but we made the attempt to expand it throughout all of DeKalb County. That's the North and the South, Democrat and Republican. So we attempted to do it in a very fair and balanced way.
Senator O'Rourke, but I'm seeing this all over the country. We're on a tour, nonpartisan, to deal with voting rights. They are clearly trying all over the country, but specifically in Georgia and in other parts of the South, to suppress the vote. What is the idea of stopping people from having the ability to vote early, to have days that they can vote early because of their work schedules or child care or daycare, or Sundays coming after church? I mean, this is a very concentrated effort.
There's no question about it, Reverend. They're playing hardball. They cut in half the number of days for early voting after we had such successful turnout in the recent presidential race. They cut it in half. They are now hooping and hollering and saying they're going to block us from having Sunday voting days. We should be working together to bring more and more people into civic participation, into being engaged with voting and participating in politics. And instead, we see them blocking at every point. I think they know their days are numbered, that when large numbers of people vote, they're not going to do well with their narrow views on race and the fact that they're virtually really almost an all-white party, and they seem to fear people voting in the communities of color. This is a consistent pattern. They introduced legislation and tried to pass it this last year of saying that local counties can shut down early voting as they wish. It's been one bill after another, all designed to suppress the vote. You would think that they would be trying to improve their record. You'd think they'd be trying to move past the days of the old South. But sadly, they want to take us backward.
But if you look at the strength, Lee, of the African-American vote, and for example, in your state, where you have a tightening race that is between Michelle Nunn and Republican candidate Perdue, is down to 1.4 percentage points. When you see that kind of tight race, African-American voters coming out, and many of them would, assumed by the Republicans, go for the Democratic candidates. It is really a real strategic move to suppress that vote for clear political reasons, aside from some of the bias that may be involved.
Well, and the Senator Millar stated it was about partisan politics. And so whatever it takes to give them the advantage, I think they're willing to do. You know, in DeKalb County, we are a predominantly African-American county. We're the most heavily Democratic county in the entire state. So our county really does matter. And so guess what? If you do have more people coming to the polls early and on Election Day, it is going to make a difference throughout DeKalb County. But the interesting thing is, through our efforts, this was a nonpartisan effort. Is it wrong to want to get more people out to the polls? It's something that, you know, my ancestors, that we rest on. I wouldn't be in elected office had not our ancestors fought and bled to give greater access to the polls. And that's simply what we have been attempting to do through this effort here. And it's historic, and other counties have taken our lead in that. Locally, Fulton County,
and it's
the largest county in the state, you know, and other counties as well.
I'm going to have to leave it there, but I promise you I'm going to be all over this. I'm going all over the country on this in the next several weeks. This is
Thank you, Reverend Johnson.
the democratic principles of this country. State Senator Nancy Rock, DeKalb County CEO Lee May, thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you
very much.
Still ahead, President.